The Krell Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and their warships were known across every star system as bringers of death and conquest. When their scouts first detected the small blue planet orbiting a yellow sun, they marked it as another easy target in their endless expansion. The beings living there called themselves humans, and they had only just begun to explore their own solar system with primitive vessels that could barely leave their homeworld's orbit. The Krell saw no threat in them and no reason to show mercy. Admiral, Peter Grant stood on the bridge of the warship Valiant watching the view screen as 300 Krell vessels assembled themselves just beyond Mars. Each enemy ship was twice the size of anything humanity had ever built, and their weapons could turn entire moons into dust. Peter had served in Earth's Navy for 30 years, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. The alien armada had arrived 6 hours ago and broadcast a simple message that left no room for negotiation or hope. Surrender everything or watch your species burn. The bridge crew worked in tense silence as they monitored the enemy fleet and waited for orders that might never come. Commander Lisa Morgan sat at her tactical station running calculations that all showed the same impossible outcome. 300 against 40 was not a battle but an execution. She looked up at Peter and saw the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Every person on every ship in the fleet knew they were staring at their own extinction, and the question was not whether they would die but how they would face that death. Peter straightened his uniform and turned to Lisa with eyes that had gone cold and hard. "Put the Krell commander through," he said, and his voice carried the kind of calm that only came from accepting the unacceptable. The view screen flickered and the image of War Master Theknor appeared before them. The alien looked like some nightmare fusion of insect and reptile with mandibles that clicked and chittered as it spoke. The translation software turned those sounds into words dripping with contempt and certainty. "Human leader, you have 1 hour remaining," said the War Master. "Surrender your worlds and resources and people to the Krell Empire, or we will take them by force. Your weapons cannot harm us, and your ships are toys made by children. Your resistance means nothing and will change nothing. Choose slavery or choose extinction. But choose quickly because our patience has limits." Peter felt every eye on the bridge turn toward him and knew that billions of people across Earth and Mars and the scattered colonies were watching this moment through delayed transmissions. He thought about his daughter living in Chicago, and his son stationed on the lunar base, and all the other sons and daughters and mothers and fathers who deserved better than this. The Krell expected him to beg or rage or crumble under the weight of impossible choices. But Peter Grant had not spent 30 years in command without learning how humans responded when their backs touched the wall. War Master, Peter said, and his voice cut through the transmission like a blade. "Humanity rejects your ultimatum completely and without reservation. We will not surrender, and we will not bow, and we will not go quietly into whatever darkness you have planned for us. If you want our worlds, then you will have to pry them from our dead hands, and I promise you that we will make you bleed for every inch." The War Master's mandibles stopped clicking for a moment as if the translation software had malfunctioned. "You choose death," it finally said. "Your entire species for nothing but pride. We have destroyed civilizations far older and stronger than yours. What hope could you possibly have against the might of the Krell Empire?" Peter allowed himself a cold smile that made even his own crew shift uncomfortably. "We have hope because you made one critical mistake," he said. "You assumed that because we're young, we're weak. And you assumed that because we're small, we don't know how to fight. Since you chose War Master, let us show you how humans do it." He cut the transmission before the alien could respond and turned to his crew with eyes blazing. "All stations go to battle protocols," he ordered. "Send the signal to Earth Command and tell them Operation Hammer of Mars is now active. Every gun, every missile, every mine we've hidden in this system activates now. We're going to teach these creatures why you never threaten humanity." Lisa Morgan's fingers flew across her console as she transmitted the activation codes that had been prepared in secret over the past 6 months. All across the solar system, hidden weapons platforms came online and began their targeting sequences. The asteroid belt that the Krell had dismissed as worthless rock suddenly became a lethal maze of kinetic launchers. Mars itself lit up with thousands of railgun batteries that had been built into the planet's crust. Stealth missiles that had been drifting silent and cold between the Krell ships suddenly activated their drives. The Krell fleet began moving forward in perfect formation, completely confident in their superiority and completely unaware that humanity had spent half a year turning their solar system into the deadliest trap ever conceived. Peter watched the enemy ships advance into his kill zone and felt something cold and hard settle into his chest. They wanted war and they would have it, but not the easy slaughter they expected. Humanity would make them pay for every human life in blood and fire and broken ships. The tactical display showed the Krell fleet entering optimal firing range, and Lisa looked up at Peter with a question in her eyes. He nodded once and she activated the firing sequence. The asteroid belt erupted with light as hundreds of kinetic launchers fired simultaneously. Tungsten rods accelerated to impossible speeds and streaked across the void toward their targets. The Krell shields had been designed to stop energy weapons, but simple, mass moving at relativistic speeds punched through them like they were paper. 6 Krell cruisers simply ceased to exist in the first 3 seconds, torn apart by impacts that released more energy than nuclear weapons. The perfect formation shattered as ships desperately tried to evade, but they were in the kill zone now and every angle was covered. Mars opened fire and the stealth missiles struck from behind, and the defense satellites revealed themselves and added their fury to the barrage. The Krell armada that had seemed so invincible moments before was suddenly dying, in fire and screaming metal. Peter Grant watched the tactical display and allowed himself one moment of savage satisfaction before returning to the grim work of war. The first battle had been a victory, but everyone in the human command structure knew it was just the opening move in a much longer and darker game. The Krell Empire had lost 40 ships in the ambush at Mars, and another 60 had limped away damaged and broken, but 3,000 years of conquest had taught them patience and fury in equal measure. Admiral Karen Wells stood in the underground command center on Earth, watching the deep space sensors with eyes that had not seen sleep in 3 days. The reports coming in from the outer colonies painted a picture that made her blood run cold. The Krell were returning with overwhelming force, and this time they brought 2,000 warships under the command of Supreme War Master Draxkor himself. The alien commander was a legend even among his own species, having personally overseen the extinction of 12 civilizations that had dared resist the Empire. Karen had studied everything humanity knew about Krell tactics and strategy, but all her knowledge felt useless against the sheer weight of numbers assembling at the edge of the solar system. 2,000 ships against the 40 that remained of Earth's defensive fleet was not a battle, but an execution delayed by mathematics. Commander Jake Phillips worked at the sensor station tracking the enemy fleet's approach vector and running calculations that all ended in the same terrible conclusion. "Admiral, we have maybe 6 days before they reach Earth," he said. "The outer defense lines at Neptune and Uranus won't slow them down for more than a few hours each. We're looking at a full planetary assault by the end of the week." Karen nodded slowly as her mind raced through options that all led to the same dark place. 6 months ago, when the Krell first made contact, the Global Defense Council had created a series of contingency plans for worst-case scenarios. The plan they called Scorched Earth had seemed like insanity at the time, but now it was the only card they had left to play. She turned to the communications station where Captain Nicole Price sat waiting for orders. "Send the evacuation code to all civilian centers," Karen said. "Priority 1 extraction starts now. Every ship capable of carrying people gets loaded and sent to the backup coordinates." Nicole's hands shook slightly as she transmitted the codes that would begin the largest evacuation in human history. Across Earth and Mars and Luna, and the scattered asteroid colonies, millions of people dropped everything and rushed toward the evacuation points. They had been drilled on this procedure for months, but the reality of actually abandoning their homes hit them like a physical blow. Children cried and adults moved in stunned silence as they boarded transports that would carry them away from everything they had ever known. General Chris Hamilton stood in the tactical center, coordinating the military side of the evacuation and trying not to think about what came after. He had spent 40 years defending Earth, and now he was preparing to destroy it. The quantum destabilizers were already in place deep in the planet's crust, positioned at precise points that would trigger a cascading fusion reaction through the entire planetary core. When activated, Earth would become a temporary star that would incinerate everything within 1,000,000 kilometers. The Krell wanted humanity's homeworld, and they would have it, but only as radioactive dust spreading through space. Admiral Peter Grant was no longer on the Valiant because that ship had died 3 days earlier at the Battle of Jupiter Station. Now he commanded from the Liberty, watching his tactical display as the human fleet fought a desperate delaying action against the Krell vanguard. Every minute they bought was another 1,000 civilians evacuated, but the cost in human lives was staggering. He watched another blue marker wink out on his display representing a ship and crew that would never see home. Again, Lieutenant Kevin Barnes called out enemy positions. From the tactical station as Krell plasma, beams cut through human ships like they were made of paper. The Apollo just went down, he reported. Independence and Ranger are taking heavy fire and requesting permission to fall back. Sir, the line is breaking in sectors 4 and 7. Peter felt the weight of command pressing down on him like gravity gone mad. Execute fighting withdrawal to coordinates Delta 7, he ordered. All ships break contact and regroup. We need to buy the ground teams more time. His words were calm, but inside he felt something breaking as he watched humanity's fleet die ship by ship and life by life. On Earth, Chris Hamilton oversaw the final preparations for Operation Scorched Earth. While the Krell bombardment began turning cities into craters, the orbital defenses were gone, and enemy landing craft were beginning their descent toward the major population centers. The aliens wanted to capture Earth intact to use as a symbol of their dominance. But humanity had other plans. Captain Jennifer Lee worked beside him coordinating the last evacuation shuttles as the planet shook from orbital strikes. Sir, we have 2 hours until the last shuttles clear the surface, Jennifer reported. Engineering teams are placing the final destabilizers now. Once activated, the cascade reaction will take approximately 40 minutes to consume the entire planetary mass. Chris looked at the holographic map showing Earth's core, surrounded by hundreds of quantum devices that represented the absolute pinnacle of human desperation and ingenuity. How many people are we leaving behind, he asked quietly. Jennifer's voice was tight with emotion when she answered. Current estimates are 2.3 billion, sir. We simply don't have enough ships or enough time. Chris closed his eyes for a moment and felt the weight of those billions pressing against his soul. They had known from the beginning that not everyone could be saved, but the reality of the numbers was almost unbearable. When he opened his eyes again, they were hard and cold. Then we make sure their sacrifice means something, he said. We make the Krell pay for every single life. In orbit, Peter Grant received the final transmission from Earth Command and felt something die inside him. The evacuation was as complete as it was going to get, and the Krell ground forces were landing in strength across the planet's surface. Supreme War Master Draxkor had taken personal command of the invasion, clearly intending to stand on Earth's surface and proclaim victory over the upstart humans. Peter looked at his remaining ships and knew this was the end of everything they had fought to protect. The Krell flagship opened a communication channel, and Draxkor's reptilian face filled the view screen. Human Commander, your resistance ends now, the Supreme War Master declared. Your world burns and your people flee like insects. Surrender and we may allow your species to survive as slaves. Continue this futile resistance and we will hunt down every last human in the galaxy and make your extinction absolute. Peter stared at the alien warlord for a long moment before he smiled a cold, terrible smile that made his own crew uncomfortable. You want Earth, War Master, he said. You can have it. But let me give you some advice from one soldier to another. When you fight humans, never assume we've shown you all our cards. We still have one surprise left and you're standing right on top of it. He cut the transmission and turned to his crew. All ships emergency jump on my mark, he ordered. Execute now. The Liberty and what remained of the human fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving the Krell Armada alone in Earth's orbit. Below them, 2,000 landing craft and hundreds of thousands of ground troops were securing the prize they had fought so hard to claim. Supreme War Master Draxkor stood on Earth's surface in what had once been Beijing and raised his clawed hand in triumph. In the last shuttle leaving Earth's atmosphere, Chris Hamilton held the detonator in his hand and watched his homeworld shrink in the viewport. Every human still on the surface had volunteered to stay behind operating the final defense systems and buying time for others to escape. They knew what was coming and they faced it with courage that made Chris's throat tight with grief and pride. Captain Jennifer Lee sat beside him, monitoring the shuttle systems and counting down the seconds until they reached minimum safe distance. Sir, we're clear of the blast radius, she reported. Chris looked at the detonator for a long moment, thinking about billions of years of human history about to end in fire. He thought about every person who had ever lived and loved and died on that blue planet. He thought about his own childhood in Texas and his wife's grave in Arlington, and the daughter he would never see again. Then he pressed the button and whispered, "Goodbye, old friend." Deep in Earth's mantle, the quantum destabilizers activated in perfect synchronization, and the planet's core began to collapse. The fusion reaction spread through the planetary mass at exponential speed, turning rock and metal into plasma. The Krell forces on the surface had less than 1 second to realize something was wrong, before the ground beneath them turned into nuclear fire. Supreme War Master Draxkor and his entire command staff ceased to exist without even time to scream. The warships in orbit had perhaps 10 seconds more as their sensors screamed warnings about the impossible energy readings coming from the planet. Then Earth exploded with the force of a supernova, and 2,000 Krell vessels vanished in a flash of light visible from neighboring star systems. Chris Hamilton watched through filtered viewports as humanity's birth world died and took the Krell invasion force with it. Tears streamed down his face, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "It's done," he said. "Now let's go show those bastards what humans do when you take everything from us. The destruction of Earth and the annihilation of Supreme War Master." Draxkor's entire fleet sent shockwaves through the Krell Empire that reached into every corner of their vast territory. For 3,000 years they had conquered through overwhelming force and the certainty that resistance was futile. But now they had encountered something that shattered that certainty. A species that would rather destroy their own homeworld than submit to slavery was not something the Krell had ever imagined possible. The High Council on their capital world of Draknor convened an emergency session, trying to understand what had just happened, and more importantly trying to figure out how to respond. Admiral Karen Wells stood on the bridge of the Exodus, a massive colony ship that had been converted into humanity's mobile command center. Around her, scattered across 100 star systems, were the remnants of her species. 3 billion survivors living on transport vessels and hidden asteroid bases, and captured enemy stations. They had no homeworld and no industrial infrastructure, and by all logic they should have been finished as a fighting force. But Karen had not survived 40 years of military service by following logic when desperation offered better options. Commander Jake Phillips worked at his station coordinating reports from dozens of human cells operating throughout Krell space. "Admiral, we have confirmation from Strike Team 7, he said. They successfully raided the supply depot in the Talos system and captured enough fuel and ammunition to keep our fleet operational for another 3 months. They also destroyed the garrison and the depot itself, so the Krell can't use that staging area anymore." Karen nodded in satisfaction. "Casualties?" she asked. 2 ships lost and 36 personnel, Jake reported. "But they took out the entire depot and killed over 200 Krell soldiers. The exchange rate is heavily in our favor. This was humanity's new strategy, and it was working better than anyone had dared hope. They couldn't match the Krell in open battle, but they were faster and more adaptable, and driven by a fury that the comfortable Krell couldn't comprehend. Human strike teams operated like ghosts appearing from nowhere, to hit supply lines and communication nodes and isolated garrisons before vanishing back into the darkness. Every raid yielded resources that humanity desperately needed, and every attack forced the Krell to divert forces to guard against the next strike. On Draknor, High Counselor, Vexmal addressed the War Council with barely controlled rage. "The humans are like parasites," he hissed through his translator. "They have no worlds and no factories, yet somehow they continue to fight. In the 6 months since we destroyed their homeworld, we have lost more ships to their raids than we did in the initial invasion. How is this possible?" War Master Krelthar, who had assumed command after Draxkor's death, slammed his clawed hand on the table hard enough to crack the surface. "They are using our own resources against us," he snarled. "Every they capture gives them fuel and weapons. Every ship they steal adds to their fleet. They feed off us like vermin." The intelligence officer Siknor brought up a holographic display showing the pattern of human attacks across dozens of systems. "Our analysis indicates they are operating in small independent cells with no central coordination," he explained. "This makes them almost impossible to track or predict. We destroy 1 cell and 3 more appear in different sectors. It is like fighting smoke." Vexamal's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Then we will adapt our strategy," he declared. "Double the guards on all supply depots and increase patrols in contested sectors. We will hunt them down systematically and eliminate them 1 cell at a time. The humans cannot sustain this kind of warfare forever." But even as the Krell adapted, humanity was already evolving new tactics. Commander Paul Drake led one of the most Successful human raiding groups operating from a captured Krell frigate they had renamed the Ghost. His crew of 38 specialists had become experts at disguising themselves as a Krell vessel long enough to get close before striking. They had hit 17 targets in the last 2 months and lost only 3 crew members to enemy action. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell piloted the Ghost through the outer system of a Krell mining colony, keeping their stolen identification codes broadcasting on all frequencies. Approaching the target, she reported, "Krell patrol pattern is exactly as predicted. They still haven't figured out we can break their encryption." Paul studied the tactical display showing the mining colony below. It was a small operation defended by only a light garrison, but it processed rare metals that the Krell war machine needed desperately. Taking it out would hurt them and give humanity another small victory in the endless string of raids that was slowly bleeding the Empire dry. "Team 1, prepare for drop," he ordered. "Team 2, you know your targets. We go in quiet, we take the refinery, and we're out in 30 minutes. No heroes and no unnecessary risks." Sergeant Linda Hayes checked her weapons and nodded to her squad of Marines. "Remember, we're not here to hold ground," she told them. "We blow the refinery, we grab what supplies we can carry, and we leave nothing useful behind. Fast and clean." The drop was executed with practiced efficiency. 20 Marines hit the ground and moved toward their objectives like shadows. The Krell garrison was used to easy occupation duty and barely had time to sound the alarm before human combat tactics overwhelmed them. Linda led her squad into the refinery control center, where a Krell technician turned toward them with mandibles clicking in surprise. Her rifle shot was precise and the alien dropped without making another sound. "Plant the charges," she ordered. 2 minutes and counting. Above in orbit, Paul watched the operation unfold on his tactical display. "Team 1 has secured the objective," he reported to his crew. "Team 2 reports enemy reinforcements are 3 minutes out. Prep for extraction." The Marines moved through the facility with brutal efficiency, gathering supplies and setting demolition charges at critical points. The Krell were tough warriors bred for conquest, but human special forces had spent months learning how to exploit every weakness in their armor and tactics. When the extraction shuttles lifted off, the refinery below erupted in a series of explosions that turned the entire facility into a smoking crater. Sarah brought the Ghost around and accelerated away from the planet as Krell fighters scrambled to intercept. "That's 17 depots this month," she said. "At this rate, we'll bleed them dry in a year." Paul shook his head. "They still have thousands of systems," he replied. "We're hurting them, but not enough to win. We need to hit them harder and make every raid count for more." Back on the Exodus, Karen Wells reviewed mission reports from Paul's team and dozens of others operating across the front. Human strike forces were causing chaos throughout Krell territory, and the casualty lists on both sides grew longer every day. But Karen could see patterns in the intelligence reports that gave her hope. The Krell Empire was beginning to fracture under the strain of fighting an enemy they couldn't pin down or predict. "Admiral, we have an incoming communication from the Krell High Council," Jake reported. "They're requesting a parley." Karen raised an eyebrow in surprise. "After 6 months of total war, now they want to talk," she said. Jake pulled up additional intelligence data. "Apparently our tactics are causing problems throughout their empire," he explained. "Other species they've conquered are starting to rebel, inspired by our resistance. The Krell are facing unrest on multiple fronts, and our raids are making it impossible for them to concentrate forces anywhere." Karen leaned back in her chair and considered the implications. Humanity was winning not through superior firepower, but through sheer stubborn refusal to quit. Every raid and every attack and every small victory showed the galaxy that the mighty Krell Empire could be hurt. The subject races watching from their conquered worlds were starting to ask themselves why they should accept slavery when these humans with nothing but determination and courage were fighting back so effectively. "Set up the meeting," Karen ordered. "But make our position crystal clear. We're not surrendering and we're not negotiating our freedom, and we're not stopping until every human who wants to go home can do so safely. If they want peace, they'll give us our space back and leave us alone. Otherwise, we'll keep bleeding them until their empire collapses from within." Jake grinned as he moved to arrange the communication. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'll make sure the message is perfectly clear." Karen looked out at the stars beyond the viewport and felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Humanity had lost their homeworld and lost billions of lives and been scattered across the galaxy like refugees, but they hadn't lost their will to fight, and they hadn't lost their ability to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground. The Krell had expected an easy conquest, and instead they had gotten a war that was tearing their empire apart from the inside. She smiled coldly and turned back to her command console. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate humans," she said to no one in particular. "Let's show them that we don't know how to quit." The parley was held in neutral space aboard an ancient station that had once belonged to a species long extinct and forgotten by the galaxy. Admiral Karen Wells arrived with a small escort, though she knew that dozens of human warships lurked nearby in stealth mode, ready to strike if the Krell attempted treachery. She had spent the last 3 days preparing for this meeting, studying every scrap of intelligence about Krell, culture and negotiation tactics, but ultimately, she knew the only thing that mattered was the simple fact that humanity refused to stop fighting. "Hi." Counselor Vexmal waited in the conference chamber flanked by War Master Krellthar and several other high-ranking Krell officials. The insectoid aliens watched Karen enter with expressions that were impossible to read through their chitinous faces. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and everyone present understood that this meeting would determine the fate of billions of lives across multiple species. Admiral Wells Vexmal began through his translator. "We appreciate your willingness to meet and discuss terms for ending this unfortunate conflict." Karen sat down across from them without ceremony or politeness. "Let's skip the diplomatic nonsense," she said bluntly. "You wanted to talk, so talk. Tell me why the mighty Krell Empire that has conquered 1,000 worlds suddenly wants to negotiate with a species that has no homeworld, and no fleet worth mentioning, Krellthar's." Mandibles twitched in what might have been irritation or respect. "Your species has proven more troublesome than we anticipated," he admitted. "Despite having no industrial base and no significant resources, you continue to resist. Your raids have cost us ships and supplies and prestige. More importantly, your resistance has inspired other conquered species to rebel against our rule." Karen smiled coldly. "Good," she said. "That was the whole point. You came to us expecting easy prey, and instead you found humans. Now your empire is fracturing because everyone you've enslaved is watching us fight and wondering why they shouldn't do the same." Vexmal leaned forward with his claws clicking against the table surface. "We are prepared to offer generous terms," he said. "Surrender now and accept vassal status within the Empire. You will be given designated worlds to settle and autonomy in your internal affairs. Your species will survive and prosper under our protection. This is more than we have ever offered any conquered species." Karen laughed, and the sound was harsh in the sterile chamber. "You're not offering us mercy," she said. "You're trying to cut your losses before your whole empire falls apart. How many rebellions are you facing right now? How many of your subject species have decided they'd rather die fighting than keep serving the Krell? Tell me, Counselor. How many ships have you had to divert from hunting us to, putting down uprisings in systems you thought you controlled?" The Krell officials exchanged glances, and Karen knew her intelligence. Reports had been accurate. The Empire was coming apart at the seams, and humanity's stubborn resistance was the spark that had lit fires across dozens of worlds. Every raid humanity conducted and every small victory they won was proof that the Krell could be beaten, and that proof was more dangerous to the Empire than any weapon. "What do you want?" Human Vexmal demanded. "Name your terms and let us end this before more blood is spilled on both sides." Karen pulled up a holographic star chart showing the region around what had once been Sol system. "This territory," she said, pointing to a sphere that encompassed 50 star systems. "You withdraw all Krell forces immediately, and you dismantle every military installation. You recognize this space as sovereign human territory, and you guarantee that any Krell ship entering our borders without permission will be considered an act of war. Those are our terms, and they are not negotiable." "Impossible," Krellthar roared. "We do not surrender territory to defeated enemies. We do not acknowledge the sovereignty of species we have conquered. This is unacceptable." Karen stood up and placed her hands on the table, leaning forward until she was face to face with the War Master. "We're not defeated," she said quietly. "That's your problem, isn't it? You can occupy our worlds and destroy our fleets and kill billions of our people, but you can't make us stop fighting. Every day this war continues, you lose more ships and more supplies, and more control over your empire. How long before the whole thing collapses under the weight of 1,000 rebellions? How long before every species you've enslaved rises up and tears your empire apart?" She straightened and crossed her arms. "You came here expecting to find broken people begging for mercy," she continued. "Instead, you found humans, and we don't beg. We don't surrender. We fight until we win or until we're extinct. Since you haven't managed to exterminate us yet, I'd say we're winning." The negotiations lasted 3 days with both sides fighting for every concession and every advantage. The Krell tried to save face while acknowledging the reality that continuing the war would cost more than they could afford. Karen remained firm on the core demands but showed flexibility on details. In the end, they reached an agreement that gave humanity 48 systems instead of 50 and established a demilitarized zone between human and Krell space. When Karen returned to the Exodus, she was greeted by cheers from the crew and tears of relief from people who had thought they would never see peace again. Jake Phillips met her at the airlock with a grin that threatened to split his face. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did they really agree to everything?" "They agreed," Karen confirmed. "As of this moment, the war is over. We're going home." The news spread through the human fleet like wildfire, jumping from ship to ship and base to base across 100 systems. People who had been living in fear and uncertainty for nearly a year suddenly found themselves free to hope again. They had survived, and more than that, they had won. They had taken on an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and they had forced that empire to acknowledge them as equals. Admiral Peter Grant stood on the observation deck of the new orbital station being constructed above New Terra, the world that would become humanity's new capital. Below him, the planet was already being transformed from a barren rock into something that could support human life. Construction crews worked around the clock, building cities and farms and all the infrastructure needed for a civilization to thrive. General Chris Hamilton joined him at the viewport, looking older than his years, with the weight of Earth's destruction still visible in every line of his face. "We paid a hell of a price," he said quietly. "We did," Peter agreed. "But we're still here, and that's what matters. We survived, and we proved that humans can't be conquered or enslaved or broken. That's worth something." Down in the command center, Karen Wells supervised the final stages of reconstruction. Human engineers were combining captured Krell technology with their own innovations to build ships and weapons that would ensure humanity never faced extinction again. They were building a new civilization from the ashes of the old one, and this time they would be ready for any threat the galaxy threw at them. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Krell Empire," reported Danny Cooper from the communications station. "It's marked as urgent, and it's from a war master named Techron." Karen frowned and wondered what fresh crisis was about to unfold. "Put it through," she ordered. The hologram showed a Krell officer wearing military insignia she didn't recognize. "Admiral Wells, I am War Master Techron," he said. "I command Krell forces in Sector 9, and I am contacting you with information you need to hear. A rogue fleet of approximately 200 ships has refused to acknowledge the peace treaty. They are heading toward your territory with the intention of continuing the war." Karen felt ice form in her stomach. "Why are you telling us this?" she demanded. "Because the treaty serves the Empire's interests," Techron replied. "And because I witnessed the recordings of what your species did at Earth. Any warrior who saw that and still wants to fight humans is a fool. Consider this information a gesture of respect from one soldier to another." The transmission ended, and Karen immediately turned to her staff. "Battle stations," she ordered. "Get me fleet status and prepare all defense platforms. It seems we have one more lesson to teach." Peter Grant rushed to the command deck as alarms began sounding throughout the station. 200 ships, he said. "That's a significant force." Karen nodded grimly. "It is," she agreed. "But we've fought worse odds, and we have something now that we didn't have before. We have time to prepare, and we have Krell technology, and most importantly, we have a species that knows exactly how dangerous we are. Let's show these rogues why their own empire signed that treaty." The word spread quickly through the human fleet, and every ship began preparing for battle. They had won their freedom and built a new home, and now someone wanted to take it all away. The humans who had survived Earth's destruction and 6 months of desperate guerrilla warfare felt something cold and hard settle into their hearts. They had learned how to fight, and they had learned how to win, and they were not about to let anyone threaten their future ever again. The rogue Krell fleet arrived at the border of human space 3 days after War Master Techron's warning, and they found a reception that shattered every expectation they had brought with them. 200 warships commanded by officers who refused to accept peace with the upstart humans dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find scattered colonies and weak defenses. Instead, they found a coordinated defense network that had been built specifically to counter Krell tactics and technology. Admiral Karen Wells watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Exodus as the enemy fleet formed up at the edge of the system. She had spent the last 72 hours preparing for this moment, and every ship and station and defense platform in human space was ready. Beside her, Commander Jake Phillips coordinated the fleet, movements with practiced efficiency, while Admiral Peter Grant commanded the forward battle group from the Liberty. They're maintaining standard Krell formation, Jake reported. Looks like they haven't adapted their tactics at all. They still think they're facing the same humans who fought at Mars. Karen smiled coldly. Then they're in for a very unpleasant surprise, she said. All ships execute attack pattern Delta 7. Show them what 3 months of studying Krell technology has taught us. The human fleet moved forward to meet the enemy, but they didn't charge in a straight line like the Krell expected. Instead, they split into 3 groups that moved in coordinated arcs designed to exploit the known weaknesses in Krell shield configuration. Ships that had been built using captured technology and human ingenuity darted through, space faster and more maneuverable than anything the Krell had ever faced from humanity before. On the Liberty, Peter Grant watched his tactical display as the battle unfolded exactly as they had planned. Target their command ship, he ordered. All forward batteries concentrate fire on that flagship. Let's cut the head off this snake. Right at the start, human ships opened fire with weapons that combined Krell plasma technology with human railgun kinetics, creating a devastating hybrid that punched through enemy shields like they were paper. The Krell had designed their defenses to stop energy weapons or kinetic projectiles, but not both simultaneously. Their shields flickered and failed under the unexpected assault, and their armor couldn't withstand the follow-up strikes. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes called out targets as they fell. Enemy flagship is taking critical damage, he reported. Their formation is breaking up. Sir, they're trying to regroup, but our attack pattern has them completely confused. The rogue Krell commander had expected an easy victory against a broken species, but instead found himself fighting an enemy that had learned from every previous engagement. Human ships used the debris field as cover, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Krell could respond effectively. Defense platforms that ringed the outer system added their fire to the barrage, creating a kill zone that the enemy fleet couldn't escape. Karen watched the battle progress and felt grim satisfaction as the tactical display showed Krell, ships dying one after another. They had come here to prove that humanity could still be conquered, but they were learning the same lesson their empire had learned months ago. Humans didn't know how to quit, and they learned fast, and they remembered every slight and every threat and every attempt to destroy them. The rogue flagship exploded in a bloom of fire that lit up the tactical display, and the enemy formation completely fell apart. Without central coordination, the Krell ships tried to fight independently, but human tactics had been designed to exploit exactly that weakness. Small human strike groups surrounded individual enemy vessels and destroyed them with concentrated fire before moving to the next target. Sergeant Linda Hayes led a boarding action against a damaged Krell cruiser that had lost its main drives. Her Marines moved through the alien ship with brutal efficiency, clearing compartments and securing critical systems. The Krell crew fought hard, but they were defending a ship that was already dying and facing enemies who had spent months learning how to kill them efficiently. Secure the engineering section, Linda ordered as her squad moved deeper into the ship. We need those power cores intact for study. Anyone who surrenders gets taken prisoner. Anyone who fights dies. Make it clear. Within 2 hours, the battle was effectively over. The rogue Krell fleet had been shattered with over half their ships destroyed, and the rest either captured or fleeing in disorder. Human casualties were surprisingly light, with only 3 ships lost and minimal damage to the defense platforms. The tactical advantage that 3 months of studying captured Krell technology had given them proved decisive. Karen stood on the bridge watching the last enemy ships jump away into hyperspace and felt the weight of command lift slightly from her shoulders. Send a message to the Krell High Council, she ordered. Tell them we've dealt with their rogue fleet and remind them exactly why breaking the treaty is a very bad idea. Jake transmitted the message along with tactical data from the battle that made it clear just how one-sided the engagement had been. The Krell Empire needed to understand that humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were thriving and building and becoming stronger every day. Any future attempts at conquest would cost more than the Empire could possibly afford. Admiral, we're receiving multiple communications from species throughout this region of space, Jake reported. Some are congratulating us on the victory. Others are asking for details about our weapons and tactics. A few are requesting meetings to discuss mutual defense agreements. Karen nodded slowly as she processed the implications. The battle had been watched by dozens of species both within and outside the Krell Empire. They had seen humanity take on 200 warships and destroy them with minimal losses. The message was clear to everyone paying attention. The humans were not victims anymore, and anyone who threatened them would pay dearly. 6 months after the treaty was signed, humanity was thriving in ways that seemed impossible just a year earlier. New Terra had been transformed into a beautiful world, with cities rising from the plains and forests growing where there had been only rock. The orbital shipyards worked constantly building new vessels that combined the best of human and Krell engineering. Colonies spread throughout the 48 systems that had been granted to humanity, and everywhere people looked toward the future with hope instead of fear. General Chris Hamilton attended the dedication ceremony for a memorial park that had been built to honor those who died in the war. At its center stood a simple black stone monument engraved with billions of names. The names of everyone who had died on Earth and everyone who had fallen in battle, and everyone who had sacrificed themselves so that others could survive. At the very top, in letters that could be seen from orbit, were the last words transmitted from human command before Earth's destruction. "Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done." Karen Wells stood before the memorial with thousands of other veterans and felt tears streaming down her face as she read the names of friends and family and strangers who had all paid the ultimate price. "We showed them," she whispered. "We showed the whole galaxy what humans are capable of when you push us to." Far behind her, the next generation of humans played and laughed, growing up in a universe where humanity was respected and feared in equal measure. Children who would never know the terror of facing extinction learned about the war in history classes and asked their parents what it had been like. The stories they heard became legends, and the legends became part of human culture in ways that would echo through centuries. The Krell Empire still existed across thousands of systems, but it was diminished and careful. They had learned that conquering humanity cost more than any victory was worth. Other species throughout the galaxy looked at humans with new eyes, seeing not primitive newcomers, but survivors who had faced annihilation and emerged stronger. Trade agreements and defense pacts were signed, and humanity began to take its place among the galactic community, not as subjects but as equals. Peter Grant retired from active service and took a position teaching military strategy at the new academy on New Terra. His students studied the battles of the war and learned the lessons that had been bought with so much blood. The most important lesson was always the same: never underestimate an enemy who refuses to surrender, and never assume that technology or numbers guarantee victory. The human spirit was worth more than any weapon, and determination could overcome odds that seemed impossible. On the anniversary of Earth's destruction, people across human space observed a moment of silence. They remembered the homeworld that had been sacrificed and the billions who had died so that billions more could live. Some people thought it was too high a price, but others understood that the choice had been simple: die as slaves or die free, and humanity had chosen freedom every single time. Karen Wells visited the memorial on that anniversary day every year for the rest of her life. She would stand before the black stone and read names until her voice grew hoarse and her legs grew tired. It was her way of honoring the debt she could never repay to those who had given everything. When younger officers asked her about the war, she always told them the same thing. "We didn't win because we were stronger or smarter or better equipped," she would say. "We won because we refused to lose. The Krell thought they could break us, but they didn't understand that humans don't know how to break. We bend and we adapt and we keep fighting no matter what. That's what saved us, and that's what will always save us." The galaxy learned that lesson well, and it changed everything. Species that had accepted slavery for generations began to rebel. Empires that had ruled through fear found their subjects demanding freedom. The old order that had existed for thousands of years began to crumble, and a new era began. An era where strength was measured not just in ships and weapons, but in the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. And at the center of it all were the humans who had lost everything and gained something far more valuable. They had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that they were worthy of survival and respect. They had taken the worst that the universe could throw at them, and they had emerged victorious not through luck or accident, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The last transmission from human command became more than just words carved in stone. It became a promise and a warning that echoed across the stars. Since you chose war, let us show you how it's done. And humanity had shown them in ways that would never be forgotten.